Hello, my name is Susan Van Wyk and I'm Senior Curator of Photography at the NGV. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that I'm presenting this talk on the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respect to their ancestors and elders, past and present, and to all First Nations peoples. And as we're coming to you remotely today, I would also like to acknowledge that my fellow speakers and people present for today's talk may be on the lands of other traditional custodians, and I pay my respects to those communities as well. Today I'm joined by my colleagues Jess Cole, Assistant Curator of Prints and Drawings, and Katharina Prugger, Curator, Contemporary Art. We'll be sharing an introductory presentation on three contemporary artists who are currently living and working in America: Ashley Gilbertson, Fred Tomaselli, and Paul Chan. New work by each of these artists have recently been acquired for the NGV Collection. Ashley Gilbertson's series of diaristic photographs show a year in the life of the people of New York as they experience the COVID pandemic, Black Lives Matter protests, and a fraught presidential election. Fred Tomaselli's Biden Beats Trump, November 8, 2020, reflects on political events and extends the life of the daily newspaper headline, thus enshrining the outcome of the 2020 United States presidential election. And Paul Chan's poster series, New Proverb Sign 2021, draws upon the evolving public discourse around racism, sexism, discrimination, and radicalism. Despite their distinctively individual practices, the work of these three artists share a common aspect. They were created in response to global events that occurred in the last 18 months. Globally, museums and art galleries are adopting rapid response collecting strategies as the mechanism with which to capture the energy and emotion of contemporary events as they happen. Responsive collecting and similar strategies recognises that by looking to the work of artists and designers that is made in immediate and direct response to world events, institutions can create opportunities to connect with audiences on issues that are relevant to people today. Responsive collecting also reflects the increasing recognition among many museums of the importance of keeping pace with current events and the role of collections in facilitating inclusivity, diversity, and advocacy. In common with other major institutions, the NGV has recognised the importance of rapid response collecting, acquiring work by artists who are addressing major world events, even as they're unfolding and changing on a daily basis. It should be noted at the outset today that the NGV's activities in this area are not limited to artists working in North America. The collection includes the work of First Nation peoples, women artists, those from the LGBTQI+ communities, and culturally diverse artists and designers working in Australia and around the world. Works recently acquired for the NGV collection through this lens of responsive collecting allow for engagement with some of the most important conversations happening today, and my colleagues and I look forward to sharing some of these with you. So to begin with, I would like to introduce you to the work of Australian photographer Ashley Gilbertson. Ash was born in Melbourne in 1978 and currently lives and works in New York City. In the 1990s, he studied with Melbourne photographer Emmanuel Santos, and today Gilbertson is widely recognised for his critical eye and his unique, often experimental approaches to topical subjects and issues that are also being covered by mainstream media. His early work focused on refugees around the world, and that interest in 2002 led him to Iraq. His work from that country, which was made largely on contract for the New York Times, earned critical acclaim from, among others, the Overseas Press Club, which awarded Gilbertson the Robert Capa Gold Medal for his work in Fallujah in 2004. Gilbertson continues to focus on conflict-related subjects as well as other global social issues. And today I would like to share three of his photographs with you. They're from an extensive series that he made in response to the events of 2020, most notably the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Black Lives Matter protests, and the 2020 US presidential election, as each was experienced on the streets of New York. These events were flashpoints in the city and drew attention to just how quickly the world can change, redefining us and the way that we live. During 2020, Gilbertson's daily routine involved long-distance running. He used his phone to capture the events unfolding around him as he ran through the streets of the city. And describing this routine, he said, "I'm running a lot, around 130 kilometres a week, and I use that time to shoot. It's very zen in a way, though it's been interesting. Covering so much ground, I see how neighbourhoods manage and change as the disasters unfold." Gilbertson has referred to this body of work as a portrait of New York. The photographs, which were posted on Instagram, are accompanied by text written by the artist. They have a diary-like quality, telling the story of a place and an individual's experience in that place. In the midst of the pandemic in 2020, Gilbertson wrote, "Trying to approach this coverage as I'm stuck in my own adopted city, unable to actually work out in the world as I'm so accustomed to. I committed early on to spend the entire year in New York in order to get deep into the weeds of a ravaged city, all the weaknesses laid bare by the virus. And it's been far more devastating than I can imagine, both from an external perspective of the things I'm seeing on the street, and then what's been happening at home. There's a benefit we have covering conflict and disaster overseas, and that is that we're alone. Doing this with our families in tow is impossible, as it turns out." Gilbertson's photographs were posted on Instagram, accompanied by heartfelt, sometimes furious captions that chart an emotional journey, and I would like to share a few of them with you. Beginning with this first photograph of an empty street of New York, on 22 April 2020, Gilbertson wrote, "Officials here tell us numbers of death have plateaued, but none can say how long this is our daily reality. New York's an incredible city, one of many gorgeous and grand spaces across a country filled with so many good people. So why did it take a crisis to show so many residents that right beneath all that beauty was a rotten core, devoid of ethical leadership or systems that support citizens? We've been failed, and we failed ourselves." By June 2020, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter protests took place across the US, and ultimately they spread around the world. On 12 July of 2020, Gilbertson posted, "On Tuesday, just south of Union Square, a figure emerged from the crowd and implored police officers to understand the pain he'd experienced as a black man. He then asked them repeatedly to kneel in solidarity. Without a word, an officer took a knee, and then another, and the protester cried." And later on in the year, on the 1st of November 2020, this dystopian image went up with the following comment: "It's actually just a coincidence that it's All Hallows Eve, because this is actually death, and he's got a date for all of us." As we know, in the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election, across the country, the US again erupted in violence. In this grim image, the figure photographed striding through the streets wears a placard with the date 20 January 2021, Inauguration Day for the new president. I would now like to hand over to Jess, who will take up this story with her discussion on the work of Fred Tomaselli. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, so this work, which, as Susan said, is by the American New York-based artist Fred Tomaselli, picks up, in a way, from the last photograph we just saw by Ashley Gilbertson, which presented a very sombre and quite apocalyptic view of the looming US election. And as you can see, it's a reworking of the front page of the New York Times, which was published as the newspaper's late edition on 8th of November 2020. which was the day it was confirmed that Democratic candidate Joe Biden had defeated incumbent Republican President Donald Trump in the 2020 US election. So, as I'm sure many of you recall, while the election took place on the 3rd of November, social distancing guidelines resulted in unprecedented levels of postal and early voting, which led to a delayed result and days of uncertainty as the world watched in anticipation. And as the votes continued to be counted over the preceding days, it became clear that voter turnout greatly exceeded recent elections, and that the Democrats had managed to secure the necessary 270 electoral college votes due to the flipping of the swing states like Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. So Tomaselli has actually greatly enlarged and centered the original image from the front page, which is the now iconic fist bump between Biden and his running mate Kamala Harris, the first female African-American and Asian-American vice president. And while they're both wearing face masks, which reminds us of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, these bright stripes of colour radiate from their powerful comradely hand gesture, which really signifies the beginning of what the artist hopes is a more just and non-discriminatory political era, particularly in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. And these stripes are actually screen printed onto the original inkjet reproduction of the newspaper. And among these stripes, Tomaselli has retained the stars and eagle from the American flag in the original image. And every other detail of the original front page is reproduced exactly, including the stand first announcing the historical significance of the event. Quote, "Race is finally called after record turnout. Chaotic term ends with rare incumbent loss." And in the news story, which isn't reproduced, the Times reports that Biden was elected, quote, "promising to restore political normalcy and a spirit of national unity to confront raging health and economic crises, and making Donald J. Trump a one-term president after 4 years of tumult in the White House." And reflecting on the work, Tomaselli said, "I saw in this image a sense of exuberant joy, a sense of excitement for the new possibilities that this administration could possibly bring to America, perhaps even a restoration of sanity." So Fred Tomaselli is known for his large-scale paintings and collaged works, which incorporate unconventional materials such as plastic, flowers, and even psychoactive drugs, as well as images from books and magazines cut out from their original contexts and reconfigured in psychedelic patterns. But beginning in 2005, under the Bush administration, Tomaselli has been transforming front pages of the New York Times with gouache and collage, creating surreal compositions that reflect on what he perceives to be the absurdity of news cycles and which respond to a variety of issues, from regional anecdotes to global crises. The artist views these interventions as abstract editorials in a way, just another decision made in the production of the news. And when the pandemic hit in 2020, Tomaselli was forced, like everyone else, to work from home in his studio in Brooklyn, and the newspaper collages took on a renewed meaning. Being small scale and readily available, it was a medium that was easy to come by and allowed him to continue his practice in isolation. But the news itself had also changed and become universal, and Tomaselli used this to introduce a sense of hope into his works. His painterly and usually very colourful interventions, like this one, underscore the tactility of newsprint in a world that is ever more reliant on digital platforms for its news. Well aware of the wane of the printed newspaper, Tomaselli is actually asking us as viewers and readers to slow down and digest in our digestion of news and media, and really reflect on and scrutinise these landmark events, which the artist attempts to freeze in time, subverting the old saying, "Today's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper." So Biden Beats Trump was published as a limited edition print in January 2021, so a couple months after the election. in celebration of the Biden-Harris inauguration and to raise funds for the organisation Fair Fight, which works to address voter suppression in the United States. Of course, the inauguration took place just days after the now historic storming of the US Capitol by a mob of Trump supporters seeking to overturn his defeat in the election. And this aggressive attack, which left 5 people dead, marked the beginning of a new swathe of politically motivated violence in the United States, but also elsewhere around the world in 2021. And so I'll now hand over to my colleague, Katharina Prugger, to speak about another work recently acquired for the NGV Collection that responds to this in the form of protest art. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you, Jess. Yes, I will be introducing you to Paul Chan's new proverb sign, which brings us into this year and very recent events, really. First, I would like to give you a little bit of background on the artist Paul Chan, who created the works that you can see in the presentation right now. Chan was born in Hong Kong in 1973 and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. He completed his art education at the School of Art Institute of Chicago and also Bard College, and he lives and works in New York today. He's a really fascinating artist in the way that from the very beginning of his career, he always worked simultaneously as a political activist and artist. He's known in his practice for varied mediums that he uses, from animated video projection and drawing to public performance and sculpture. He's also well known for founding an experimental publishing house called Badlands Unlimited in 2010. Really interestingly, Chan withdrew from making art from 2009 to 2014, but he did keep working on this imprint, Badlands Unlimited, and published over 50 titles by a wide range of artists and philosophers. So really an artist with a really broad view of interesting topics and interests. He returned to art making in 2014 with a large retrospective at the Schaulager in Basel, and then went on to win the Guggenheim Foundation's Hugo Boss Prize the following year, so one of the most prestigious art prizes there are. The 3 works that you can see here, we recently acquired by Chan. They actually originated in response to a recent mass shooting that happened in the US on March 16, 2021. 8 people, 6 of those who were women of Asian descent, were murdered in Atlanta, Georgia. The shooting was in the media called Spar shooting, which has problematic connotations in it, of course, as well. The tragedy was just part of a wave of anti-Asian hate crimes around the world during the pandemic, which we also witnessed here in Australia, of course. It really marks the first time Chan, even though he has been politically active in the past in his work, he has now for the first time addressed issues that are facing the Asian American community in his art. And he said in a recent interview with the New York Times that these murders were the boiling point for me. I couldn't let the moment go without manifesting my feelings into form. The works are designed by Chan as real protest signs. They're made by mounting imprints on corrugated plastic, so they're quite sturdy, and protesters could carry them at rallies. The new works here are part of a group of works he started in 2017. They're called the New Proverbs, and he first made them for the Million Women's March in Washington, D.C. and New York in 2016, which ties in again to the Trump presidency. And he has since created several protest signs for use in a wide range of rallies, including LGBTQA plus solidarity and anti-gun violence rallies. And some other slogans that he has printed on these signs are, for example, fags hate Trump or NRA kills teens. some of you might be familiar with the aesthetic of these signs because they are inspired by the posters of the infamous Westboro Baptist Church, which of course is this notorious homophobic hate speech group in America. And so Chan uses visual cues from the color combinations and the sort of bold typography that the original church signs employed. Same as Fred Tomaselli, these works are sold for charity, really. So proceeds of sales of these new Prover signs always go to non-profit groups. In this case, it's Heart of Dinner, a non-profit group in New York dedicated to combating food insecurity and isolation within the city's elderly Asian American community. If you are in Melbourne before the end of March 2022, I really encourage you to come and see Paul Chan and Fred Tomaselli's works in person in our free collection exhibition, We Change the World, which is currently on level 3 of the Ian Potter Centre, NGV Australia at Fed Square. I'm coming to an end of this presentation now, but please look out for other works from our responsive collecting initiative coming on display in the future or being featured in programs. As Susan mentioned, they are incredibly diverse works and cover a wide range of cultural, social, political, and environmental issues. So some really exciting new additions to the collection. Thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation, and I hope you can join us soon again for another presentation, or hopefully see you soon in the gallery. Thank you.